Have you ever heard of Esther? It's a book about a queen who became a queen in an uncommon way. For she wasn't even a person of that region. She was a foreigner in the land of King Xerxes, yet he chose her. It's an amazing lesson on loyalty and friendship and faithfulness to her God and to her people. So describe for a moment a faithful friend. Well, as I look back at my grade school and high school years, the faithful friends that I had were people who did these things. They were loyal and trustworthy. If they said they would do something, I knew they would stand by my side. They would share and be generous with what they have with me, and I with them. A true friend. Also, they would be encouragers instead of bringing you down all the time. They would lift you up and say, "You can do it. You've got this." An encourager. And finally, a good listener. One who pays attention, who listens to what you have to say, one that puts your best interest in mind. Today, we're going to be digging deeper into that lesson on Esther, and she isn't thinking just of her own self-preservation. She's thinking about others. In fact, not just a friend, but an entire nation that is going to be persecuted. One of the key phrases in this book is, "Perhaps you were born for such a time as this." This is Uncle Mordecai talking to Esther, encouraging her, saying, "Don't be afraid, but you need to do this in order to save your people." Who knows? Maybe God will use you at some point in your life, maybe not to save a nation, but maybe to help someone who is getting picked on, to stand up for someone who is being verbally teased. Maybe you were put in that place for such a time as this. Now let's enjoy an overview on the whole book of Esther in the following video.
Esther's story takes place during the years of the Jewish exile, around 470 BC. Now the Jews had been defeated by Babylon, which meant they were exiled from their homeland and taken as slaves. But later, the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians. So now, the Jews found themselves under the rule of the Persian king, Xerxes. That's where our story begins. King Xerxes decided he was going to throw a party. And this wasn't your standard cookies and punch type of party. This party lasted for 7 days and included all manner of lavish feasting and drinking. Now on the last day, the king decided to show off his queen, who was very beautiful. But when he called for her to come to the feast, she refused. This greatly angered the king, and not only the king, but his counselors and noblemen as well, because they were thinking, if the queen treats the king this way, wives everywhere are going to start disrespecting their husbands. They're going to be mouthing off, refusing to change the baby. They're not going to cook the falafel for dinner. It's going to be chaos. So the king declared that the queen was no longer the queen, which meant that he needed to find a new one. Now, if you're an all-powerful male in the ancient world, what better way to find a new wife than to parade every beautiful single woman in the land through your palace? So that's what he did. Among the hundreds of women sent to the palace was a girl named Esther. Esther was secretly a Jew, and she was also an orphan raised by her uncle Mordecai. And though she was essentially the lowest possible social class, the Lord was with Esther, and she was a beautiful and graceful woman. When she was brought to the palace, she found favor among all the king's staff, and ultimately the king himself, who chose her to be queen. Sometime later, Esther's uncle Mordecai was sitting at the city gate when he overheard 2 men plotting to kill the king. Mordecai quickly relayed this to Esther, who told the king, who promptly solved the problem. Even though he saved the king's life, Mordecai was never recognized for what he did. And sometime later, he found himself in trouble when a man named Haman rose to power. Haman was the king's second in command, And whenever Haman walked through the streets, everyone was ordered to bow down before him. But Mordecai, being a Jew and a follower of God, refused to bow to Haman. When Haman found out about it, he was enraged. In fact, he was so enraged that he plotted to kill not only Mordecai, but every single Jew in the empire, women and children included. By Haman's influence, the king sent out a decree that ordered all Jews to be executed and their property taken. When Mordecai found out about it, he begged Esther to approach the king and ask him to change his mind. But Esther knew that if she were to approach the king without being summoned, she could, by law, be put to death. Esther was in torment, but finally, after much fasting and praying, she decided to approach the king, even if she should perish. When the king saw her standing before him, he loved her and invited her to speak. "What do you wish, Esther?" the king asked. Esther replied, "I would ask that the king and Haman come to a feast that I shall prepare." The king was delighted, as was Haman, and together they feasted. Toward the end of the meal, the king asked Esther, "What is it that you wish? Anything you want will be granted to you, up to half my kingdom." Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to another feast that I will prepare, and there I will answer the king's question." Haman left the palace happy that day, but on his way home, he noticed Mordecai at the gate and was reminded of Mordecai's refusal to bow to him. Haman's mood darkened. He decided to have a gallows built on which Mordecai would be hanged the following day. That night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered the book of records to be brought and read to him. When the account of Mordecai's warning of the plot to kill the king was read, the king asked, "What have we done to honor Mordecai for saving my life?" "Nothing, your majesty," replied his servant. So the king called for Haman, and when he arrived, the king asked, "What should I do for someone I want to honor?" Haman thought he was thinking of him, and he said, "You should put your royal robes on him, and a crown, and let him ride your horse through the streets so that everyone will know that this is the man the king honors." The king thought that was a great idea, and he said, "Perfect! Go and get Mordecai and do exactly what you have just said. In fact, you can be the one to lead the horse around." Soon after this, the day of Queen Esther's feast arrived. After they had finished eating, the king again asked Esther, "What is it that you wish? Anything you want will be granted to you, up to half my kingdom." Esther replied, "O king, if it please you, all I ask is that my life and the life of my people be spared. For I am a Jew, and it has been decreed that all Jews in the empire should be annihilated." When he heard this, the king was furious. "Who would do such a thing to my queen?" he shouted. "Haman," replied Esther. "And furthermore, he has built a gallows to hang Mordecai, who once saved the king's life." The king replied, "Then let Haman be hanged on it." And so it was. Haman was executed on the gallows, and a new decree was issued, saving the lives of the Jews. Esther and Mordecai were honored and spent the rest of their days serving the king.
What an amazing lesson. Esther had amazing courage. She was so brave. She stood before the king knowing that her life might be taken from her if the king didn't want her in his presence. Yet the king said, "Come near." He was going to give her anything she wanted in the kingdom, up to half the kingdom. And she chose to point out that her people needed to be saved, that the wicked Haman had plotted a plan that the king had agreed to, that her nation would be destroyed. The king's anger burned against Haman. Things certainly changed because of the bravery of this young woman named Esther, an unlikely hero who had amazing courage. Well, Jesus tells us what true friendship is all about. And Esther was all about thinking about others. For Jesus said in John 15, "Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Esther was willing to do what was necessary, even die for the nation. Jesus was willing to do what was necessary, being willing to give his life on the cross for you and for me. That's amazing love. That's true friendship. For greater love has no one than this, than he laid down his life for his friends. And Jesus goes on to say, if you believe in me, you are my friends. You are a friend of God. Jesus lays down his life for his friends. You are his friends. So Esther and Mordecai are models of trust and hope, imperfect people fulfilling God's will. Sometimes we wonder, can God use me? Can I help the world? Can I stand up for what I believe in? Can I truly make a difference? Well, Esther was a simple girl, and God used her in mighty ways. Mordecai was just a faithful Jew. God used him not only to save the king, but he eventually became second in command behind the king. Imperfect people fulfilling God's will. For once again, God showed his love in that he delivered his people once again. And God has delivered you through his son, Jesus. For greater love has no one than this, than he laid down his life for his friends. Have an amazing day.